All right. Well, thank you all for being here tonight. And thank you especially to our panelists, a group of very impressive women. I personally think so. And also, a little tidbit, I don't know if everybody saw in New York City today, all the graduates that was going on today. So thank you for making it in with graduate traffic. And congratulations to any graduates from NYU, Parsons, School of Visual Arts, everywhere in our great city. May you go forth and make wonderful things. And that said, we are actually in the business of making wonderful things. And as we are Korean American women and Korean women, we are very, have our own experience, similar experiences, if not the same. And that's why we have these discussions. So that said, being in food editorial and also just writing for it is something we're all very familiar with. And is this where everyone began in your career? Every single one of us? Did we all begin in food editorial? I know that, Myo, you began somewhere different.
I began somewhere very different. I was one of those very annoyingly energetic high schoolers that thought she was going to conquer the world. And my goal was always to have a very colorful obituary. My parents did not think that was funny. But I guess my obituary would say something like, hi, this is Myo Quinn. She was born Kim Myo-san in Asuncion, Paraguay. She got a master's in accounting and information systems, and I became a CPA, an auditor. It is as riveting as you can imagine. And then I followed the big bucks and worked for a hedge fund for about 10 years as a fund accountant. And when I was pregnant with my second son, Oliver, I decided I no longer like sleep or my well-being, and I quit, and I went and applied to the French Culinary Institute and started working at Gramercy Tavern as a line cook. While I was there, I got pregnant with my third son, Hugh. And as much as I loved it and I had a ton of stamina and wanted to be there, it was not a very healthy situation for my family as a whole. I remember one service, I was on the line at the end of the service. I picked up my phone to look at it, and I had like 20 missed calls from the school, my husband, our nanny. And then I realized this is just, the system isn't working for me working these long hours at a restaurant with 3 young kids at home. Luckily, around that time, I got a call from the French Culinary Institute, their courier services. Her name was Gina Novak, and she said, hey, the Food Network is looking for an intern. It's for the production of Worst Cooks in America. They want someone specifically that has kitchen experience. Would you be interested? It's 40 hours a week, capped. You come into an office, you help out, and perfect. It worked for my lifestyle at the time. And I went in, and when Worst Cooks of America was filming, it's 4 days on, and then you get a dark day. And on your dark day, you go into the Food Network test kitchen, and you are just of service. Whoever needs you, you're there. You're doing mise en place, you're testing recipes, whatever you need. And I slowly made my way, spending more time in the test kitchen and less in production, because I felt like that's where my heart really was, and I really enjoyed being in it. And the beautiful thing about, and I think you can all attest to this, is, you know, New York City has over 8 million people, but the food media community is very small, especially amongst freelancers. So when you're in the test kitchen, someone developing a recipe next to you might say, hey, I was going to go to the Food 52 tomorrow to work an assist on some shoot. I can't go. Are you available? And then you start building these relationships, and you start going to different locations. So I ended up going to Good Housekeeping, the Food Network, various branches of it. And that's how I got my foot as an intern into this industry, which I think is a really great way to start. And then lastly, the last place I was at was Simply Recipes as associate editorial director. And I recently left because I will be moving to Korea full time this summer.
Yeah, that's. I mean, this is
interesting obit now.
Okay. More than interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, this is pretty much the best city. That's how I also launched my career. I can relate to that because this is a city in which really the network is only so big, and yet it is extensive enough that you can actually start to meet other people in it. Christina and Caroline, do you have were you beginning actually in this industry, or how did you come into it?
Well, okay, so ever since I was a kid, I knew I wanted to be a food writer. So that's definitely something because food has always been a huge part of my life as a kid and shaped really a big part of my identity. So that being said, my parents certainly did not want me to go down that route. So I did investor relations and financial communications. And then I was also like, oh my God, my obit is also going to be really boring. So then I decided to quit and move to Argentina with no plans, really. I was just like, I'm just going to go. While I was there, I became a food blogger and started working for, it was a website. It was in Spanish, French, and English. And I started working for this website. It catered to expats of who spoke those three languages. And then I really loved journalism professionally. We did, it was like culture and news, and I was out there reporting in Spanish about food, and I covered like Obama's win from Argentina. So that was really exciting. And I applied to journalism school while I was there. And then I was backpacking around Brazil, and then I went into an internet cafe, and then that's how I found out I got into Columbia Journalism School, and I like screamed, and then everyone was in the internet cafe like looking at me like, okay, you're like, who is this person like screaming in English? And then I went to Columbia, and then after that, I actually did video production for New York Magazine, but I was always so like just so drawn to all the food stories. Like I did like Fashion Week, but I was and, like people were like, "Oh my God, that's so amazing!" I was like, "Yeah, it's cool." But then I was like, "But guess what restaurant I get to go to next week?" You know, and they're like, "Okay." so, so then, but then so ever since I was young, though, I've always wanted to tell like immigrant women's stories, and particularly people like my grandma, because my grandma has like really good like sonmat, and she always has. And so I really wanted to tell like immigrant grandmothers' stories. But at that time, food media did not want that. So I started my own program called Cooking with Granny. It was a video and dinner and class workshops taught by immigrant grandmothers from different cultures. And then after that, I started working a lot with Eater. And then from there, I've just been really building up my portfolio. So I've been able to write for actually Bon Appetit, New York Times, with really quite a focus on immigrant-run small businesses in New York City.
Christina, what about?
I don't think about my obituary. I don't know what this theme is.
I mean, that's how we started,
I'm
but
not-
it's really.
I'm not going to die.
Ever.
But wow, that was so fascinating. So many questions for both of you. But I also feel that I have a very, very different path into what I still kind of don't really know what to call what has become my career so far, especially because I work as a freelancer now. You mentioned a little bit about how that is just kind of a strange place to exist in, and that's totally true. But I found my way into food media through the journalism side. So I studied journalism in college as an undergraduate, kind of partially because I think I was too scared to study poetry, which is what I really wanted to study. And like I went to a very pre-professional oriented undergraduate university, so it was just like everyone around me seemed to know what they wanted to study and what they wanted to do, and so I did feel a bit like pressured to pick something that felt like it would lead into a job. And I also was entering college in 2007, so it was just like a very strange time where you heard about people who were a few years older and who were entering the workforce, just entering this like horrid economic time during the recession. And so I very much was like, okay, I need to get a job. Let me major in like the lowest paying major I can that this school offers. But so I started my career as a business and technology reporter, actually. I didn't like it very much at all, but I think the silver lining of that is that, you find other ways to cope with when you're not really doing something you like very much. And for me, it became very obvious very quickly that I was spending all of my free time at home just like losing myself in blogs and cookbooks and just people who were creating all these things that I didn't even know until I didn't really even know until I found these people that this was something that someone could do for a living, which is ironic because I was already working as a journalist, but for some reason it just didn't really translate that, oh, there are people who develop recipes for a living, and that there are all these different ways to work in food. So I actually got my foot in the door at Bon Appetit because I was supposed to be a temp worker on like a 3-week project. I got hired through a Facebook group
Yes.
that I think still actually exists, but it was called Food Gals.
I'm still a part of that.
I remember that. Yeah.
Yeah, food gals. Okay, sorry.
Yeah.
Go on.
So like Food Gals is a very happening place back in the day. I don't use
It's
Facebook
still
anymore except to sell
functional.
stuff, so I
Yes,
don't really know
it
what
is.
goes on there anymore. Okay, great to know. And so yes, I got connected to someone who hired me, and then I ended up getting hired there full time. And then, however, it was still like not really exactly like a living wage, especially not for someone who was just like trying to live in New York. So while I was there, I was also working a couple days a week at a restaurant. I was serving like on the weekends and on Friday nights. And so I worked like 7 days a week for a while doing that. And then this is how we met because it was through the USHG family.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I actually at one point, like a couple of years into working as an assistant editor at Bon Appetit, I realized that I wanted to learn more about like the cooking and the recipe development side of things. And so I actually left and I decided that I wanted to learn how to cook. So I went to go work at another Union Square hospitality group, the restaurant, like kind of a sister to Gramercy, called Untitled. It used to be the restaurant at the Whitney Museum. It is no longer there. I can't remember what's there now. But anyway, so like I worked there as a line cook for a year and a half. Also worked like 20 hours a week on top of that job, doing copywriting for Food 52 back when they were like getting their shop off the ground. So I was a copywriter for the shop. And again, that was also because, again, living wage.
Exactly. Yeah.
So there was a lot of time when I was working 7 days a week, actually.
Yeah.
And then I ended up going back to Bon Appetit in a kind of different capacity. I became like a section editor, and my job was a lot more about how to translate interesting ideas for like stories for home cooks, but that were drawn from like the professional restaurant world or from the professional chef's world, and translate that into these like techniques and recipes and stories that would be inspiring and doable for people at home.
Yeah.
And that was kind of when I realized that was where I enjoyed being. Like I enjoyed the teaching aspect of it. I enjoyed distilling the information for like different audiences. And then so I was there for like 5 more years after that and got to do so many things. I'm looking at some of them on the screen right now. So I had these different opportunities to pursue like different mediums, podcast, video, certainly writing and editing. And then I became a freelancer. I left that job in like 2022.
Right.
And then I, for the last couple of years, have been working on my first cookbook, which as you know,
Spring
Caroline,
2026, that will be Christina's cookbook date, just letting you know.
and as you know, that's like a whole other different
different
thing.
ballgame.
That's a different
Yeah.
panel.
Completely.
Entirely.
Completely. But more on that later. That said, we've all had different paths completely. And it's been interesting to, as for myself, I can say, witnessing everybody's trajectory of their careers. As I was a freelancer and I was trying to figure stuff out as well, it was always an interesting thing to see Korean American women working in the space, and names that you would just become more familiar with as you saw them. And, the journey is in itself, though we get to know each other by each other's name or by hearing from each other or knowing each other, it's still wrought with a lot of frustration and a lot of obstacles to get through, and a lot of evolution that needs to happen, whether from ourselves or for the industry to follow. And for example, my journey involved a lot of rejection. I still remember the day I got rejected 7 times as a freelancer. And that is the part that I think people don't really emphasize enough about, where you're not really taught how to deal with certain circumstances. And as we've all been in this industry now for a few years, how would you say that anything has evolved or changed in terms of what you can write, what you can contribute?
So one thing that I am actually, well, now that I'm hearing you, I am grateful that in journalism school they said that we were always going to be rejected for the most part. And then they would even be like, even after you graduate, you probably won't have a job. And I'm like, what am I doing here? But anyway, I think the industry has evolved a lot. And I think for me, having wanted to be in food media for so long, since, like not Martha Stewart. Oh my God. Oh, she's like domestic doyenne, like one of the first, Julia Child.
Before Martha.
Anyway,
yes.
Martha.
Yes.
So, having her just like on the screen and just like being so in love with like how food can be transformed, watching it on media, but then also seeing like my grandma can do kind of like the same thing. And like this is something, these are generational recipes that she's known since she was like 5 or 6 because of, universal gendered roles. But, that's an aside. But so my grandmother has always known to cook. And I was always just like, so ever since I was little, I was like, no, I want to see more people like my grandma, like teaching how to cook, because they cook so damn well and they deserve the spotlight. So going into food media, that was why I wanted to go into food media, because there weren't enough of those voices. There wasn't enough of that spotlight. And even if there was that spotlight, like the hands behind the scenes weren't doing it justice and with the respect and like the deep well of knowledge, sometimes to the point of being a little offensive, right? And so that's why I was like, no, I want to be a food journalist, because I want to be the ones who can tell these stories, because I've experienced so much of, the suffering and the pain of not having our voices and our faces out there. So when I started, there still wasn't that much. Like I said, I really wanted to do this project called Cooking with Granny, and I heard so many rejections. They said that it was, there just wasn't an interest in like immigrant stories, let alone like immigrant women's stories. And then, so I just started my own, because I was like, well, I don't care. Like, I know how to tell these stories. I'm going to tell these stories. So I started my own project, and then that was what Cooking with Granny was. And then food media and like culture started changing. And I think a lot of it actually is because of social media, because then that's where you saw representation. There were no gatekeepers. You had so many people who were so excited about food and restaurants in New York City that did not need to be gatekept, particularly by a certain demographic that was ruling food media in New York. So then as that social media content started generating so much interest in these kinds of stories. That's also around the time when I started hearing from editors being like, actually, yes, we want more of these like immigrant run business stories. We want more of, I'm from Queens. I'm such a Queens girl. We want more Queens stories, so because Queens being like the haven of immigration in New York City. But yeah, so then that's kind of just like the ball started rolling and rolling. And then that's kind of how I started getting a lot more stories. But I really did have to kind of wait, make my opportunities as I was waiting, and then just kind of finally have this culture shift.
Yeah. Anyone? I want to add to that.
Oh, it's interesting. Like, I have this memory of there's this photo that's used in this article that I'm staring at that I wrote many years ago, called "How I Came to Love the Korean Food I Grew Up Resenting." Not talking about that.
I
Just-
remember this article.
we can talk about that, but that's actually not what I'm talking about. The photo, it's just making me remember. That photo was from a cover story. I think it was the first cover story that I had sort of pitched and edited and executed to completion, and it was a profile of Sohee Kim, who is the chef and proprietor of several restaurants in New York, incredible restaurants, The Good Fork, in Red Hook, Insa in Gowanus, Gage and Tollner most recently in downtown Brooklyn. And I think she's amazing. And
Me too.
I pitched this story about her. She had just published Korean Home Cooking. I think that was like the kind of angle for the story. And so it was about her and about her recipes. And it was just interesting because like working as someone on a team full time within an editorial team that had a very specific lens that wanted to tell that wanted to tell like immigrant stories or wanted to tell like I hate to say it, but it's true, sort of like other stories through a very specific lens where it kind of like had to be a certain kind of cool, or it had to have a certain kind of look, or the chef had to look a certain kind of way. There were all these sort of things, spoken and unspoken, that like set these parameters for whether or not those stories would end up being featured. And it's just interesting looking back at how much of that I didn't really like think to question, because it was the only way to even get the thing on the cover or get the thing greenlit was to play within those parameters. And like there's so much obviously that I've learned since then. It's always interesting to go back and like remember what was different about the landscape then, because I actually don't think that would happen today, and I think that's great. I think it's a really good thing that wouldn't happen today.
Absolutely.
And I feel confident about that. But yeah.
Was there any?
Yeah, I'm straddled by two incredible writers, and though I do write, I see my identity more as an editor. And I entered the editorial world when SEO was still king. And if you know what SEO is, sit with your PTSD while I traumatize everyone else. So SEO is a strategy that digital media companies use to make sure that their content ends up at the top of the Google list. So for example, a home cook goes into Google and says, how to make a chocolate cake. As an editor, I'm going to assign a chocolate cake recipe and make sure that that recipe, when someone Googles it, is the first recipe that shows up on the top of Google. And in order to win in that game, there are certain rules you have to follow. You have to follow the Google rule. Google will tell you exactly what they're looking for. SEO, unfortunately, completely strangles creativity and diversity. And I can share an example. Let's say that as an editor, I want to assign a recipe for a roast chicken. In my research, Google will tell me that the roast chicken recipe I have to assign in order to win, because if you're first, you get more traffic. If you get more traffic, your company makes more money, and then your boss is happy, and then you get to keep your job. That chicken recipe has to be chicken breast. It has to be seasoned with olive oil, salt, and pepper, maybe a dry herb, but that's it. You can't do anything else. And so when I'm assigning that recipe, that's the recipe I'm going to assign. If I pull a call out to all these recipe developers and say, hey, who wants to do a roast chicken recipe? I might get tons of amazing pitches. A Korean American or anyone could pitch me something like, hey, my mom has this incredible secret. She puts doenjang and mayo to marinate chicken thighs because who eats chicken breasts? But I can't assign that to her because it's not going to perform. The good news, coming back, is that a lot of that has changed over the past few years. The content that editorial teams generate now have many different avenues in which Google isn't king, not quite, but there's social media. You might be distributing content through Google Discover or Apple News or newsletter. And so you can create content that is very unique to target those mediums. And so that means that you can have more diversity, you can have more voice, you can have more specificity. So I can assign that roast chicken thigh recipe as the secret to making the juiciest, my Korean mom's secret to making the juiciest roast chicken recipe. And I think that has been really exciting for a lot of recipe developers and writers that have previously pitched in and felt like they haven't been heard, but now suddenly there's this hunger for more of that.
Yes, I've definitely noticed the hunger. Has everybody here Googled Korean recipes, Korean American inspired recipes? Anyone? Come on, this is fine. Yes, thank you. But that said, there's lots still to be told. And the thing is, we've been allowed to tell more of these stories as time has gone on. And I've noticed this. My first assignment for a lot of these major publications did have to do a lot with being having a Korean American recipe or Korean recipe, Korean inspired recipe. And although it wasn't something that we necessarily want to be boxed in with, it is something that is undeniably something in demand, something that is a story that has still yet to be told, and to be told by women, specifically women by, past experience and years, women did teach these men how to cook. And yet we are the ones who are not quite as known or elevated in media to be the voice of it. And that's why we're doing this. But that said, we, do have stories that we are telling. And that brings me back to a point that Caroline made, which was that you are very much telling all the stories of immigrant families in Queens in front of, behind the camera. And for all of us, we're trying to get a very meaningful story and very meaningful voices that matter. And that is something that I want to ask everybody is what stories do you love telling the most?
So I grew up in Queens. I grew up in a working class Korean immigrant family in Flushing, which is one of the largest Korean resident populations. It's not Manhattan's Koreatown, where Korean families don't really live. It's in New York City. It's Flushing, Queens, and I grew up I would help my grandma make kimchi, and then she would actually dig a hole and then bury it underground. She used to make totorimuk, and my sibs and I would actually go and chase squirrels away to get the acorns, okay? I'm talking really, really, really traditional. And of course, it would be the best mook ever. And then I was older, so we would kind of gamify it. So my brother would do most of the work. Be like, whoever gets the most acorns, wins this ridiculous thing. And then he'd be like, yeah. And then he would just run and get as many.
Did he win or did you win?
No, he won. But we all let him win. We're like, okay. No, you should win. Don't you want to win?
It's like, oh no, please don't.
Right, because they had to be the really big, fat, fresh ones. My grandma was picking, they had to be the good ones, right? Not just like any old. So he like he thought it was like such an adventure. So so I grew up like that's what I meant by like food is like such a huge part of my identity since I was a kid. And then at the same time, growing up in Queens, I had friends of lots of different cultures, and I would go and eat in their homes, and it was so good, right? Like I still remember the first time I went to my friend's home, and her mom, who's Indian, made puri, which is like this like fried bread, and it came right out of the pan, and it was like still like a big ball, and I was just like, oh my god, so and then on top of that, my parents and we would go to different like small restaurants in Queens too to eat, and so it was always just something that was so special to me because I couldn't believe the amount of like skills that all of these chefs, cooks had. And then, with the hardships of being an immigrant here. So like language barriers, cultural barriers. So kind of like I've always rooted for the underdog. And so like and also knowing that experience of struggle, like I've always just been like, I need to give the spotlight to the people who deserve it and are not getting it. I need to give the spotlight to the people who have the skills and are not getting it. Whether it's because of the language barrier, the cultural barrier, not knowing how like food PR works, so it's just something that I've always wanted to do, and I can't say like I can't express like how happy I am that I get to tell these stories that are just so meaningful to me.
Mm-hmm. What stories do you like to tell?
So as an editor, I love working with writers on personal essays that have this surprising specificity that only something so internal in that writer can. It's so internal to that writer that only they can write it. So, for example, I was trying to think of an example, and the one that came to mind feels really special is last summer I worked on this grilling package for Simply Recipes, and part of the grilling package had a how-to guide for Korean barbecue at home. So I worked with the writer, which you probably all know. Her name is Irene Yu. I worked with her, on putting together this guide and 3 recipes. I think it was bulgogi, doenjangjjigae, and cheese corn. Or is it corn cheese?
Cheesy corn.
Cheese corn.
Delicious, either way.
So good. And to be completely honest, this is the kind of package that you can kind of you could technically hand over to any Korean American writer, right? It's not a complicated package. You can write it up. But what delighted me so much about the final story that Irene wrote was the fact that, yes, it had the guide to preparing all these things and how you eat and the tools that you need, but it was really a lesson in the art of nunchi. Like her story was really about how you move banchan around the table to put it in front of the person that likes the gakdugi. Like how to flip, when you flip the meat, when it's cooked, it doesn't end there. You take your chopstick and you push it on the pan towards the person that you can tell needs the next bite of meat, right? And they don't have much on their plate. So these like nuanced things that really only her as an insightful writer could bring out into a story that was more than just a guide of Korean barbecue, right? So things like that really delight me.
On a personal note, I've worked with Myo. She was my editor for a piece that I did for Simply Recipes a few years ago. And I wasn't sure how it would be received because it was all about not just growing up Korean American, with our recipes at home, but kind of how, I was formed by other grandmother's love because I did not grow up with my 할머니. She lived in Korea, and she was my only living grandparent at the time. And it was a very open idea because I was pretty much speaking about, Jewish mothers that I had learned from Italian families we had grown up with. And I had pitched it to somebody else, and they just did not understand that New York, although is a very wide community with much immigrant life, that this was something that they thought would appeal to anybody. So thank you, because it was my pleasure to do that with you. Christina, what stories do you like to tell?
It's a good question. So I think it's interesting. I love hearing Caroline Shin talk about how she knew that this was what she wanted to do from like when she was a kid. And I find that so cool, and I also am very envious of it because I actually like feel kind of totally the opposite, not totally the opposite, but that wasn't necessarily my avenue or driving force. And um it's kind of like I've always loved food, and I've always been really drawn to it, but it's also like a complicated medium when you're very much trying to figure out like what is my place here, what is my place in all the spheres of identity I occupy, especially obviously topical to our conversation, like as as an American citizen born of Korean heritage to parents who immigrated to this country when they were kids, and like my entire family on both sides of my family all live here. I was just telling the women before we went on that I'm going to Korea for the first time in my life this summer. So it's just I feel very grateful for the kinds of stories that I think we're starting to see more now from the diaspora and from the kind of like children of immigrants who have these very nuanced and often complicated and emotional experiences about like identity and navigating the messiness of what kind of Korean am I or what kind of American am I, when I don't necessarily feel like I'm not fluent in the language, or I haven't been to the country, or I don't I don't look like an Irene, or I don't look like an whatever it is. And so for me, just to bring it back to your question, I think the stories I'm most interested in are around stories of uncertainty in navigating and finding identity. And food happens to be the primary medium in which I tell those stories. But I think a lot of times, like, there's a lot of pressure to present something of yourself that feels finished and complete or defined. And it's taken me a very long time to realize that's like maybe not ever going to be my experience. But I also think that's many other people's experience too, is that like you might always be working to find out more about yourself. And so it's important for me to try to make the space to talk about that.
That's definitely true. I've felt the same way, is that, a lot of our stories feel that, and this personally was a frustration for a small time, which was that why do our stories always have to be so focused within identity, within memory, within tradition, non-tradition versus tradition? We're capable of telling so much more. And however, this is something that I have to keep in mind that this is something we're very acquainted with in every different experience. And this has been something that we might have to fight for, which is to break the monolith that we're all the same, eat the same, know the same things. But I get that, which is that we're not all the same people. And this is something that we have to constantly reinforce. I know there's many more questions that we could go over and so much more experience we could have. But I was going to say, in support of each other right now, and, there's just so much going on in how things are being reported. There is censorship. This is stuff we can't ignore. And there are things that we are now being told what is appropriate to report on, what is something people want to read, and what is, it's almost inhibiting because there are so many things we want to say. And with the spectrum of social media, it's like trying to distinguish our identity and what we're outspoken about, what we're passionate about, and yet what is most important to readers and our identity as writers. And that said, the support of the community really helps. And Korean Americans and Koreans in America, we're still figuring this out. We're still figuring out the unity in community, I think. I think many people still have a conception of what they think it looks like and it can easily translate into elitism, and can, and that's why I think art writing is so important. Have you felt best supported by your communities, by the Korean American community, or even your food community?
Yeah, Irene is the best.
She is. We love you, Irene.
Yeah. Well, no, I mean, I was just going to say, like, Irene is like one of many people who are in my life, like who I've met in New York, like who are other Korean Americans who work in food or who don't work in food, and who are some of the most supportive people in my life. Like, it is so wholesome and joyful and pure, and like there is no elitism. There's such an excitement, I think, to connect over these different points that we're all coming from around something that is like undeniably shared about who we are. And so I learn stuff, like I learn random, just history or slang from her and from our friend James, like all the time. And, they're just so excited to share it, or they're like, let's go to Gopchang and like you're gonna eat some intestine or something. They just get so psyched about it. And so that's like been so important to me as someone who like didn't actually grow up with like many Korean American friends. Just like it has been kind of transformative for feeling, I don't know, just like a sense of ease and place and home within a community that actually can at times feel like quite elite and quite small, as we've sort of touched upon in this conversation.
I hear this question and I want to hide. And the reason for this is my inbox looks absolutely disastrous, and I need to do a better job of replying to pitches. So if you wrote in a pitch and I haven't responded, give me some grace.
No one will ever know the editor's
it's okay.
plight.
I know,
except
the
for
editor's
other
plight.
Don't we
I
won't
agree.
tell anyone. So.
I agree.
I know.
But what this question makes me think of is, I'm here because people believed in me when I pitched and came up with ideas and showed up. And so it is now my turn in being in the position that I am, and I hope to be in this position for much longer to mirror that back to the community. But I will also add, maybe a little tidbit, is that if you are pitching in to an editor and you have this amazing idea, there's a few things to keep in mind. One is making sure that you pitch actually, what does it make sense for it to live in the platform that you're pitching it into? So for example, I worked for Simply Recipes, and we are a weeknight dinner. So some keywords are weeknight dinner recipes. So some keywords are like quick and easy, under 30 minutes. Like it's everywhere on our social media, on our website. But I often get pitches for like sourdough, long-term fermentation, like kimchi, which is great, but like give me a makimchi pitch, right? Like something that you can make, a busy mom can make after picking up the kids from school. So having some awareness of like, does your pitch fit into the mold that you're trying to put it into? And also I would propose taking a look at the editor's pitch guide. A lot of editors have a pitch guide that really outline, like, this is exactly what I'm looking for. Here's the key language that I will be paying attention to. Here are some examples of content that I am accepting. And then lastly, don't yell at your editor for not responding. An editor-writer relationship is truly a beautiful thing. If you work together, it's a collaboration. So if you work together and learn from each other, and as a writer, learn to deliver what is, keeping your voice, but learning to deliver what your editor wants and is looking for. It's an amazing growth opportunity, I think. So that's all I have to say.
I agree with you. The editor-writer relationship is so beautiful. Like I would say I feel really supported by the editors who have continued to work with me over the years. I actually, like, I remember like some editors have been like, some writers don't want to take like edits, and I'm like, I don't understand because like you bring so much to like my story. Like if my first draft got published, it just wouldn't be as punchy. It just wouldn't work as well. So yeah, but then I think I'm also kind of choosy about my editors too, because there have been times where I have either worked with or encountered editors who just had no idea or didn't really care or prioritize their perspective over my own. And then I've learned that no matter what, I don't really want to work with them again because, like, what's the point? The story is not going to be mine at the end of the day. So, the editor relationships that I do have, I cherish them so much because I do learn from them. And they also express appreciation. They express appreciation for the perspective I bring in. And that mutually beneficial relationship has been kind of like the foundation, I would say, for my career, really.
Yeah. We do have one and a half more questions before we go to Q&A. But to that, I would say that there really is the editor. Having Asian American editors in the space makes a difference. It really does. There are questions you just don't have to answer. There is clarity that is provided that really is just so refreshing. And it is something that I continue to advocate for, which is that invite more faces into your space because, truth, you can tell when there's who wasn't in the room when certain decisions were being made. So please continue to advocate for more our faces in there. Last question. Well, two little last questions. Favorite Korean comfort food and what do we hope for the future and anybody who is looking to get into this industry? Who would like to start?
I'll start. Comfort food, 해물 순두부 always. And what was the second thing? What we hope
for the future?
I think Myo touched upon it a little bit. Like, I think that it's really promising that people are branching toward more like niche communities as media and social media become more kind of fragmented, which I think is actually like a good thing because I think it, like to your point, it pushes away some of the salt and pepper roast chicken needs and makes way for like the doenjang chicken. And I do think that what's really cool about those kind of micro communities, being part of many and creating one myself, is like people will the people who want to find you will find you, and that is very, very powerful. And I think that like we will all continue to want to find more people with whom we can actually feel in some semblance of community with, as the world continues to be so crazy.
Yeah.
I eat kimchi jjigae maybe 3 times a week, and I make it every time. I am a mom of 3 kids, so I'm making dinner every single night for my family, and that is the one thing that no one ever complains about. So I make it all the time. It's delicious. My hope for the future. I think if you are someone that wants to work in food media and are interested, and I can give the perspective from, again, an editor, if food media is a space that you want to work in and you want to get published, my hope for you is that from now going forward and continuously, really for the rest of your life, is to work on crafting your writing. Christina talked about, writing to express her discovery of her identity, but writing really is the process of discovering. In writing, you will discover these things. But focus really on the technicality of it, because as our industry completely changes, and we don't know, even as editors, we're like, where is this going? What is happening with AI? Like, where is Google going to go? Is it Reddit? There's so much fear in the space. But if you have the concrete skills tucked into your belt and you know how to outline, story flow, punctuation and grammar, really the basic things that you can work on a daily basis and get better and better at, there will always be a space for you in this industry. And yeah.
My favorite comfort food, 된장찌개. Like I could eat that. I had that today twice for breakfast and lunch. I could have that every single day and I would be happy. Actually, my mom even brought me some more today because we just love 된장찌개 in our household. And then for advice, Christina touched on this. It's about making opportunities right now, and I feel like it's just so great that you are able to, right? So when I started cooking with Granny, it was because YouTube existed, and then Kickstarter. It was Kickstarter fun, and Kickstarter existed. Now we have Substack. Now you have and like you can actually get paid to put together some really great food media content. And with your perspective, there is some almost like influencer journalists that I follow, and I think their content is really wonderful in how they weave together the storytelling, which now comes to Mio's point about having like really kind of like making concrete like your personal style, like whether it's like social media content, whether it's writing, but whatever your platform is going to be, is that I don't know what AI is going to do to us, but I do feel like it's going to be really, really difficult if you are able to nail down your personal style for AI or anybody to really like take that from you, and you can really stand out for what your personal style is.
Absolutely. Favorite comfort food is my father's galbi and kimchi bokkeumbap. I don't know what makes it so good. My sister's in the audience. I'm sure she could oil. But I want to say to end with that, a lot of good points were just made. It's going to continue to evolve. The landscape of it, the demand of it is something that we are so much more vocal about. And I think that's paved the way. Thank you all for helping pave that way in the publications. And with that, we can begin the Q&A. If anybody has a question, don't be shy.
We actually have an online question that came in. The online question asks, has your relationship with Korean food evolved over time through your work? And how does that personal evolution show up in your writing or content?
It definitely evolved for me. I personally went through the phase from childhood until I went to college, which was that I wasn't anti-Korean food, but I wasn't as pro because there was other things to be had as a child, offered in school, offered in birthday parties, and the landscape of that. There was only one Korean restaurant in Westchester at the time that every family went to. You would see everybody there. But through writing, we were talking about this in the back, which is that there's a lot that can be offered healing-wise to the things that you did not know and acknowledge, things that you didn't think were okay. And I was always bold about my choice of having Korean food. I was not a child that was, and if I was made fun of for having it, I was like, you don't know what you're missing. But it is very much something that I've come to more peace with and more acknowledgement of through work. What about you guys?
I've always just deeply loved Korean food because I used to help my grandma cook in the kitchen, and we were close. So and I got to see like the magic happen, like I said, from these acorns on the ground to like the most delicious totorimok I've ever had. That being said, when I was at school, of course, like I wanted to get like the junkiest food ever, which is like Lunchables. So, like I'm just like, oh my God. I mean, now it's funny because like now the lunches that we pack for my daughter sometimes it is like 볶음밥 or like kalbi with rice and like baekgimchi or something. And she eats it very happily, but she's also only 5, so who knows what'll happen when she's like in her teenage years. But yeah, so I mean, so okay, so as a journalist though, I can say like as Korean dining has evolved so much. So from being traditional to super modern and very, very, very creative. So I think that is something that evolution is something that is like that's been very enlightening for me. Just kind of like watching it go from like Korean barbecue to something just like crazy like a I don't know, like a seaweed cigar roll at Changshik, and then you know whatever this like crazy machination is that it's on the plate that doesn't even like look like food really, but tastes so delicious. It looks like it looks like artwork, and so seeing that evolution has been a learning experience for me.
For me, I am making after having had children and now having to feed my family, I've made a concerted effort to mostly cook Korean food at home because I want them to grow up with the full understanding of what is it to eat Korean food. What is it supposed to taste like? How are you supposed to eat it? How are you supposed to behave at the table when you eat Korean food? And in doing that, there's no better practice on learning what that is than teaching your own child. And so I have felt now as a mother and now as an editor that I am equipped with that. It's kind of been really empowering for me to say, oh, I do this every single day with 3 children at my table. I can write about this. There's no better way to, there's no better person to be able to tell the story. And I felt very empowered by that.
And I love that we're the ones telling the story. So, Christina.
I've been thinking this whole time about what I was going to say, and I still don't really know. It's a little, I think that earlier in my career when I was younger and and food media, as we've discussed, was like a very different place. I felt like there was an expectation of who I had to be and what kind of body of knowledge I had to have because of what I looked like and because of what my heritage was, which we've kind of talked a little bit about. And actually, like, even as Korean food is like part of who I am and it's like part of my blood and I will always love it so much, actually, like, a large part of my changing relationship to it over time and as I've gotten older has been to actually like give myself permission to accept that like I wasn't raised to be this expert. Right. It wasn't part of my own culinary education and like what I gravitated toward in my own food education. And that doesn't have to take away from any bit of the Koreanness that I feel like as a person. So sorry, that was like kind of dramatic, but and a little bit different, but it really has to do with like, this is something I can love and also I can relinquish like the need to be someone else's like definition or image of like a Korean American person working in food and like what that has to mean in terms of my body of work. Yes. And I can also 100% love Korean food with all my heart.
Definitely. Any other questions? Yes.
It might be really simple. I've been trying to make things the way my grandmother made them. So the proudest thing is when my mom or my aunt says, wow, your 된장찌개 tastes like grandma's. Then I know I got it right. Acorn, I haven't been able to do it yet. Do you know where I could get the recipe? Or did you write it down when you and your grandmother?
Yeah, which squirrels?
Oh my God.
I've tried different acorns. I've tried different soaking methods, and it's not coming out right.
I wish I had documented those recipes when I was younger. But I know that she would look for like the big fat green ones that were like that looked really clean. Because sometimes they're like the small acorns, but she always went for the big ones. And in Flushing, I can tell you which trees have them.
She made a map, probably.
But it would take multiple days because it was like the peeling, the grinding, like the drying. I mean, it took a long time. Yeah.
On that note, I think we're out of time, but I'm sure you can stay and answer the question. So do you want to quickly go?
Go ahead.
I think she can also ask questions afterwards to you guys. So thank you so much for the wonderful conversation. It was so lovely to have you.
One more thing. This really just continues to thrive. If you want to see more Korean women and Korean American women thriving in this environment, buy our books. We have one coming out in spring 2026. Irene Yu is coming out with one in the fall. The Korean vegan, Joanne Molinaro, also coming out with a book. And it's on for pre-sale right now. And my book, yes, please go ahead. We are also hoping there will be more books available from all of us. You want to see us thrive, you got to show everybody that we're worth it, and we are worth it. So thank you so much for coming tonight.
Thank you.